Hello.
Hey, what, Will? You all right, Shannon? Cool. Okay, welcome, guys. Obviously, you notice it's Wednesday night rather than Thursday. We did say it last week in the live stream. We're doing our event tomorrow night, ending Homelessness through local democracy. So that will occupy the normal Thursday night slot. We've had about 5 questions come in during the week, and I don't know if we're going to get any other live streams tonight because we didn't really advertise it very well. But basically, a few bits as always before we get into it. No personal data in the chat, please. Just ask questions as if they're about someone else. It will actually prevent us from giving sensible answers sometimes. One of the questions that came in through the week, I'll explain a bit more about that in a minute. Yeah, no personal data. It's not legal advice. We're trying to do our best here to be useful, and we'll try to refer to the code of guidance and bits and pieces of law whenever we can, so you've got it yourselves. But obviously, it's not as good as actually having a solicitor. And a few other bits and pieces. So yeah, just a little bit about the event tomorrow. Um, Obviously, there's a lot about national lobbying, crisis shelter, always lobbying central government and doing this and that. But local government has actually got a huge amount of influence over how many houses are built, what sort of services are offered. And so it seems like there's a bit of a gap in the market in terms of people actually trying to use local democracy to kind of make any difference. So that's what the event's going to be about. So we've got Will Moy, who's set up Full Fact and kind of does a lot of stuff around analysing what's really been said by politicians and kind of challenging politicians, holding them to account. We've got one of our local councillors called Lucy Bywater, who will be talking about, the rules of actually coming and asking questions, what you can do, and also how the local politics works. And then we've got a guy called John Gwynn, who is like a BBC local democracy reporter, and he spends his life sitting in these council meetings, basically. So he knows more than pretty much anyone I know about how it all works. So yeah, it should be a good night. Me and Shannon will be there as well, talking about some of the work we've been doing. So do check it out. As I say, I'm hoping it just means people can understand a little bit more about how they can go and challenge their local council in a systemic way. Yeah, cool. So a little bit of follow up from last week. I said I was going to go away and find a case. Basically, a question had come in, and it was essentially someone who was having had a health condition, which meant they had to use the toilet like 50 times a day. And I'm pretty sure they've been offered sort of hostel type accommodation with shared toilets. Now, it reminded me of a case which I'd recently read. I couldn't remember which case it was. I've looked it up. It's Amina Ahmed v Haringey, and I'm going to stick the kind of the transcript into the chat, and I've also already put it in the description, so you can check it out yourself. But in that case, and it's not good news. Um, Essentially, that doesn't. I'm not sure if that's actually what. Hold on. So if you Google what I've just put in the thing, it'll come up. I'll get the link in a minute. But basically, yeah. So essentially, in that case, because the review officer, which was Minos Perdios from Housing Reviews, because he had recognised she had a disability in this case, and basically, I mean, there was issues around when the council were told that she had this health issue. So obviously, in an ideal world, you want to raise everything straight away and make sure you kind of got medical backup ASAP. Really, you shouldn't have to, but that's the way it works in the real world. So in that case, Minos Perdios basically said, there's a toilet down the corridor, a few yards down the corridor, and that means there's no issues, it's suitable. And as I say, it's a bit of a disheartening case, but that's where the case law lay in that case. So if you want to find out a bit more about that, just check out that. To check out the, if you just literally stick what I put in that chat into Google, it will come up with the case. So as I say, it's not a hyperlink for some reason, but anyway. So yeah, as I say, just following up from last week. And in terms of today, how you right? You're right, Western Goddess. Sorry, I don't know your proper names, but yeah, hopefully you'll say, yeah, I recognise that you've been here before, so it's nice to see you. Um, how you right, Nick? Good to have you here. Hopefully you guys can check out tomorrow as well. So, in terms of questions we've had coming in through the weekend, I'm actually going to ask the final question I sent for you guys, if that's all right first, because it's again it follows on from last week, and it also fits in with a lot of the local news kind of reels at the moment in terms of councils going bankrupt. So Birmingham is like done. Nottingham City's kind of been in the news this week at the same time, and it made me really annoyed. I was telling Shannon about this earlier. I was on LinkedIn, which I don't really like anyway. But someone put a comment in there basically complaining how everyone points the finger at local authorities and it's the policymakers that are at fault. And it's like it makes me angry because I'm like, yeah, people do still have agency in those situations. You can still do something about it. If policy is making you break the law, then you can do stuff about that, and you shouldn't have to just accept it. And in one sense, what we're seeing now, I would say, is decades worth of councils gatekeeping people, just pushing kicking the can down the road, basically sweeping the problem under the carpet, and now kind of sort of reaping all that coming back to them really. So yeah, the comment that came in, it was on the back of what we talked about councils advising people to wait for the bailiffs. And so we kind of went through that in a fair amount of detail. So do check it out if you want to find out more. But basically, this individual said, after watching a recent video and reading the ombudsman report, so we kind of gave a couple of ombudsman reports last week. It's obvious the council, this is Islington Council, it's obvious the council did nothing in line of the code. Although the ombudsman findings confirm the council failed on all levels to follow legislation, it still got away with it. Councils, including legal aid, are supporting the stay until the bailiffs arrive. That's not even a plan at the beginning. It should only be last resort, and the last resort should be in agreement with the tenant as per the code. Is it fair to say that escalating concerns at the early stage is better than months down the line? So that's the actual question here, which I thought is a good question as well as a good observation. And again, you guys might differ on this. When you're making a complaint, there is a little bit of a dynamic to be aware of in that it might get the councils to follow the law, but it would also potentially get the housing officers backs up. So I've talked about this before when I worked in Bedford Borough Council. If someone kind of made a nuisance of themselves by daring to complain, they would often, although kind of they get the technical legal response, they kind of end up getting the worst kind of housing at the end of it. So they get the hard to let properties or something like that. So there is a dynamic where if you annoy housing officers at the start, there is a danger that happens. So when me and Shannon worked at Just Us in Bedford, wherever possible, we'd wait until the person was housed before we raised the complaint, because what we didn't want to do is infuriate the housing officers and get them to kind of take revenge out on the individual. Now, yeah, that being said, in a situation where obviously it's time sensitive, I guess complaining to the chief exec is probably a good way to get a fair response as possible. But I don't know if you guys have got anything to add to that or any experiences around how to kind of gauge when to complain. As I say, there is a bit of a lottery to it, I guess.
Yes. So for me, I'm not huge. I don't enjoy confrontation. I'm happy to do it on behalf of people, but it's not something that I'm like, oh yay. And I think actually you can get some successes by complaining, but without going down the complaints route and sort of almost doing it quite passive aggressively and quite naively, and sort of just checking that your understanding's right. I just want to clarify this. I just want to, I want to be really super clear about this, this, and this. And it gives you the breathing space because you can still go down the complaints route. So you've still got that option. And like you say, if it's a really serious situation, then yeah, go straight to chief exec, go down the complaints route. But if it is something that potentially could be done in like a friendly way and you can show that you know what you're talking about and you're not going to take any rubbish from anyone, but doing it in a nice way, sometimes I have had good successes there because you're just not getting the other person's back up. And I think you're right. I think people get invested in the decisions they make and you kind of want to avoid that. So you kind of sounds really manipulative now I'm saying it out loud. You kind of want to plant the seed that actually they may not be wrong, they may not be right, um, and giving them other options to sort of choose the right way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that and I guess it may be different for us because by that stage we kind of knew the council officer, so we could kind of be like that. And kind of, as you say, you kind of if a housing officer says, "Oh, you need to wait till the bailiffs come," you'd kind of quote that bit of code of guidance back and say, "Well, so my understanding was that this was the case. Can you tell me what the actual truth is?" And obviously they're not going to be able to contradict it. So I don't. I mean, I think a lot of the problems people are having these days is like literally the housing officer won't respond to them at all, and so you can't even have the conversation, unfortunately. So yeah, I think and I think the other thing to bear in mind with the LGO is that you won't see any compensation for it at least a year, maybe 18 months, maybe 2 years. So it's not in any way a quick fix at all. But raising the complaint in the first place to a chief exec might actually be enough to kind of get them to at least fall into line and follow the law for a little bit. So yeah, I don't know. Will, have you got anything to add to that at all?
Well, my experience of making complaints is usually limited to just getting somebody to sort of reply to a letter or something. And so usually when somebody else has looked at it and said, yeah, sorry about that, we've got them to answer it, I drop out. But I mean, I have got a couple of complaints where I take it further, but I never get as far as the ombudsman, partly because legal aid doesn't cover that. And if I'm going to go that far, I might as well go for a judicial review. But I would say the one thing, and it's been ringing in my ears since last week, I think we were discussing this, that you said, Mike, which is something that's worth repeating, is don't be put off by the first response you get. The stage one complaint is usually rubbish. And I'm saying that because I just received one about 10 minutes before we started, which I suspect was written by the person I was complaining about. And you've really just got to keep going higher if but yeah, don't be put off by that. And I think that's all I can really add, I think.
Yeah.
I think to
I mean, sorry,
build
Sean.
on that, sorry, Mike. But sometimes, like you say, like that housing officer is probably the one that responds to the complaint. Sometimes you can almost be creative and send the complaint to customer services or to directly the complaints people rather than the housing option services. And obviously, yeah, like Mike said previously, like chief exec, but there's other sort of ways that you can raise complaints, whether that be with MPs or councillors or the democratic service, like whichever it is, that again might just limit the bias you'll receive after making a complaint.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Actually, I think involving the MP or involving a councillor is probably a good way to kind of ensure that, yeah, you don't kind of become public enemy number one and get yeah, a real bad deal. So yeah, hey, right, Geraldine. Yeah, so I was you might have missed the start. We're doing it tonight because we've got the event on tomorrow night. So yeah, apologies for not publicising it very well. So that was that question. I don't think I've got anything else. Yeah, I think that kind of covers it. Hopefully that's useful. So next question, again about complaints actually, and so it goes back to this kind of thing. So I guess the point that question was making is that, you know, you've got a situation where the LGO kind of, you know, found fault at every stage, and yet the council, yeah, council can kind of do it again tomorrow, and there's no real repercussions. And again, this is why, you know, I have absolutely no sympathy with local or authority officers who are kind of crying about the situation they're in right now, by kind of acting in these ways over decades of kind of minimizing things and avoiding kind of taking responsibility for things. This is what it's led to. So you're absolutely right, and we always say often, you know, it's cheaper for councils to break the law, get caught by the LGO, pay the fine or pay the compensation, than it is to do the job properly in the first place. So I think in that respect, the only thing we can do about that is make it more of a political issue. So where it's possible to do so, you know, where you've got an LGO kind of finding, actually banging the drum about that and kind of making it more, you know, making it public. I'm not necessarily talking about going to the papers, but raising it in a housing committee. This is the sort of stuff we'll be talking about tomorrow, actually. But, you know, raising it and trying to increase the currency of these kind of failings, because, you know, I'm again working at Bedford Borough Council. One of the seniors basically said, you know, when with rough sleepers, they said, well, no council follows the law, as if like, yeah, that was just the way it worked. You know, no one got homeless applications accepted. So it's about kind of, you know, working on the council to kind of get them to have a reason to care, because the money won't make them care. It's cheaper to do what they're doing. So yeah, so yeah, this next question that comes in. So how are councils supposed to inform you of the complaints process and the time frame? So we've talked before about when a council makes certain decisions. So like in that section 184 decision, they have to tell you that you've got a right to review, and it kind of tells you how to do it. So you need to do it, you know, email this person within 21 days receiving the letter. But I don't, as far as I know, there's no equivalent in terms of a council's obligation to tell you that you can complain. However, I'm certain they've got an obligation to have a complaints process which is readily accessible on the website and potentially in a leaflet or something in the customer service centre. And so yeah, if you just Google a council's name and the complaints policy, you'll get the basics there. Most councils that I have dealt with have a two-stage complaint process, but I've worked with a couple now that have got three-stage, which is pointless. It's just a, so, you know, like Will just picked up on. So for a two-stage complaint process, the first stage is always a waste of time. For a three-stage complaint, in my experience, the first two stages are a waste of time. It's not until you get to that last stage that they actually, you know, admit anything anyway. So and the time frames, I mean, yeah, generally like 10 working days for the council to respond. They can ask for an extension of that complaint in terms of processing it if they're overrun or it's complicated. So if you want to find out about complaints, just check out what the council's website says about it. And and I guess what I would do personally is I don't follow it in terms of I won't email the complaints team at the first stage. I'll email the chief exec. I'll still call it formal complaint, so it'll still be a formal complaint stage one, but it's alerting the chief exec to a particular problem, and I think it generally kind of leads to a better response. So again, yeah, I don't know, yeah, anyone anything to that?
The only thing I'd add, sorry, is and I think I said this last time, that when making a stage one complaint, it's a good idea to couple that with a subject access request, which you can do. You'd have to do it to, I mean, you should be able to just say it as part of your complaint, but then they'll probably say, oh no, you should have gone to this email address. So if you look on the organization's website, there's usually somebody you can write to there, or if not, just ask the complaints people to do it, and they'll tell you where to go in a nice way, where to apply to. And then when you get the rubbish stage one response, you've got a file there which you can look at and draw on for preparing the stage two. And stage two may include reference to the fact that you tried to get the file and you haven't. There must be stuff missing. So yeah, that and it's free. So, and they've got to give it within 1 month, which is about how long it'll take them to get the stage one back to you.
I guess as well, like, without going off on too much of a tangent, because we could probably all chat for hours about it, but the way you do a complaint is probably quite important. Like, you actually don't need to do like pages and pages of complaint. That, yes, might be really emotive and might make you feel better, but they don't care about that, and that sounds really like harsh. But if you can try and just almost bullet point it, because I find councils respond better to complaints like that as well, because they can sort of clearly see which injustices you're complaining about and which parts you're complaining about. Whereas when it's a long essay, it's much more difficult for them to sort of give a fairer response. But yeah, I won't go too much on a tangent about that.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, just picking up on both of what you said there. So what Will said, so the subject access quest, again, if time is not of the essence, getting it before you even start the complaints process is a good thing to do, because again, you know, going on my experience of working in Bedford is, you know, they would delete records, they would, you know, they would kind of falsify records. But if you're making the request before they get to complain about it, then hopefully you get the information you need before they've kind of gone through it and been a bit selective about it. So yeah, I think that's just something better. And then in terms of just what Shannon said, so yeah, so your complaint might be like 5 different bullet points. You know, number one, staff member was really rude, and that's always worth saying. It'll never get upheld, but it's worth saying. You know, kind of, and then there was, you know, delaying accepting homeless application, delaying offering temporary accommodation, poor quality of temporary accommodation will all be kind of different points, because then it kind of, you can kind of run that through, or even, in fact, it's even better just to number them rather than bullet points. So you can then kind of say, well, you know, point one, and then you kind of, that ends up kind of being the theme for the rest of the complaints process. So their response will be numbered as well, and then your stage two will be numbered, and so on. So it's a good way to organise it. So questions come in on the live stream. Might as well, it's a quick one, so we just do it now. So homelessness prevention officer has not replied back to me. It's been 2 weeks and I've followed up twice, and also called in main centre line. They told them to respond, but has not as yet. So again, this is such a common issue, and I get the feeling that councils are just going to break down basically, and this is going to be the standard. All we can say is complain when, you know, if you've got something which is important, you know, so you're about to become homeless would certainly be one of them. Complain to the chief exec, start it then, copy any your councillors, copy in the MP. It might seem like a minor thing to complain about, but it's the difference between potentially having homelessness prevented, or kind of, you know, being left on the streets, or kind of going through unnecessary stress. So I don't know of another way of doing it other than doing it that way, is kind of just complain about it. And yeah, I mean, yeah, I've talked about this before. So our former colleague John, who still works at Just Us, he would kind of give them, like, he'd be really impatient basically. If he didn't get a response back, his next email would be copying in their boss, and then when he didn't get a response from them, you just immediately copy in the next one up. So that kind of worked. But I think it might be a bit different for a professional. So I think if you're kind of in that situation yourself, just go straight to the chief exec. But yeah, unfortunately, we can't say anything more useful than that at the moment. As I say, I think some of these councils like Birmingham and Nottingham and Croydon, I just think they're just gonna fall apart basically. The homelessness teams is my guess, until something done about it. So yeah, So next question that came in through the week. Okay, so if a homeless person send an email which details everything you mentioned, so basically we talk about, triggering a homeless application by email by saying, I'm homeless, can you help me out? That's a homeless application. So everything, yeah, blah blah blah. Would the duty be triggered on receipt of the email? I was arguing yes until I realised it was taking councils 3 to 4 weeks to conduct their full homelessness assessment. At which point the client is already halfway through their 56-day relief duty and had minimal support from the council. So, really good question. I mean, it just highlights how stupidly confusing the Homelessness Reduction Act is. So when you send the email, the instant the email pops up in their inbox, they don't have to read it, but as soon as it's sent, as soon as they have reason to believe that you might be homeless or threatened with homelessness, and you've asked them for help with housing, the homeless application has been triggered, and they should immediately start assessing and kind of working out what other duties they might owe. One of the other duties they might owe is the relief duty, and that is triggered the moment they are satisfied, as in initially it's that low threshold of having reasons to believe you might be homeless, but then once they're satisfied, so they might involve an inquiry to a landlord or something like that. Once they're satisfied you're homeless and you're eligible, well, technically speaking, you're eligible and then you're homeless, but it doesn't matter which one. That's when the relief duty kicks in. So if you're not in priority need, it's not going to make much difference other than just be a delay. It would be a big problem though if you've given them reasons to believe you might be eligible, might be in priority need, because that's when the interim duty to give you temporary accommodation kicks in. And if they're taking 3 to 4 weeks to process those applications and then realizing, oh, we should actually be putting this person in temporary accommodation, and that's immediately maladministration, and that's something you get compensation for from the ombudsman. So yeah, so I think that's just understanding that these different trigger sort of sections, and they can come in complicated orders. I'm trying to piece together like a flow chart of this process, and I'm having an absolute nightmare. I had a big flip chart out, loads of little printed things of all these different things that could happen, and it's an absolute nightmare to do it properly. So you can get some shortened versions on I've seen online, but it's very difficult to give a comprehensive one. I'm trying to, but it's taken ages. But yeah, that's kind of what might be happening there. So that's why it's so key that you're showing that showing the council that the person might be in priority need, because that's when things actually start making a difference. If you're not in priority need, then it's not going to do you any harm by making a homeless application, but the council doesn't really have to do anything particularly concrete. They can go through the motions, but it doesn't get your house. So yeah, anyone want to add anything to that?
I just like to add that I think that we've talked before, because I've often sort of sung the praises of the Homeless Prevention Act 2017, because it does do some quite useful things in other areas. But this is a good example of where it really fails in the way that people cynically thought it would when it came in, because the people who are not in priority need really don't gain very much from it, because they can ignore you until they decide that they're satisfied that the relief duty is owed, and that could take ages. And if you don't complain, it might take forever. And then they've got 8 weeks to try and help you find somewhere. And then at the end of the 8 weeks, it's, oh dear, sorry, we didn't help you find anywhere. Better luck next time. And they can close the file. Now, somebody might say, well, they have to do a personal housing plan and a housing needs assessment, but they can go through the motions. And unless there's priority need, I don't think there's anything you can bite on to challenge them. But please, somebody prove me wrong. But it's very unfortunate that, I mean, it may be that some well-intentioned council might take the relief duty seriously, but I'd have thought if they're hard pressed and the private sector stuff's going to the people in priority need, why would they feel the need to help you find somewhere in the private sector if it's hard to find any?
Yeah,
so that's a bit negative, but
yeah, no, I think it will vary. It will vary. I think once you get kind of well away from London, you might have some housing officers who have the time to actually do a good job, and they will actually. So you're talking absolutely right about kind of councils being incentivized to actually do things. So if you're not in priority need, there's no incentive to give you to support you into private rented. The one exception is that I'd say, or one exception, there might be others, is where you've got a rent deposit scheme and they need to manage their relationship with landlords really well. And let's say, and I don't know how often it happens, but technically they might have a property come in, they need to fill it with a respectable tenant or whatever. and someone comes in who's not in private need, they're working or something, and actually in that situation, I've seen people get assisted into private rented accommodation through the RDS. So it's not, again, it kind of goes back to the thing of there's nothing to lose by making a homeless application. It's not going to do any harm, but unless you're in private need, it's unlikely to lead to any actual offer of housing. You might still get something useful. I mean, they could tell you about other options, give you a form or something which or leaflet which might have something on there which is useful, but there's no teeth to it really. So yeah. Yeah, cool. Just another question coming in the live chat. Let's get to it. So, the non-assigned housing officer phoned Friday, bullied them into either choosing half derelict squatters' flats or leave the county or thrown off the housing list. Given 3 days' notice, housing officer ignored formal complaint. Call on private. So I'm not quite sure what that last bit means. But yeah. So firstly, yeah, lots of housing officers are bullies. We just need to be open about that and just say, do you know what? Because we had a it sounded really negative. Me and Shannon were in a very useful meeting this week because we've got the homelessness strategy going on in Bedford, and we basically worked with Just Us to kind of get some people who've been homeless to actually give some inputs to the strategy. And they were talking, just kind of talking about the impact of just being treated like shit by housing officers basically, and just humiliated and just kind of gaslit and kind of just really kind of leaving in a worse place than they were in the first place. So yeah, kind of goes against what I just said. This is why I do it all by email. Don't go to a council yourself. But yeah, and yes, councils will give you like really kind of poor options and give you like 10 minutes to decide. I guess we would have to say every time is accept whatever property it is they give you and then challenge it. Don't turn it down, because then you're in a very sticky situation. Potentially, it's very difficult to argue kind of that it's unsuitable. So yeah, I think as difficult as to say accept their first offer and then complain, or then then kind of do something else to go get a solicitor. And it's not unusual to be offered accommodation hundreds of miles away. That's kind of again something which is pretty standard. Again, if you can get a solicitor, there's ways of challenging it, but it's not straightforward for a lay person to do that. And then again, that final point, so housing officer ignored formal complaint. Yeah, just remember, first complaint, their response won't take anything seriously. That's why you need to go to stage 2. In the stage 1 complaint, it will say at the end of it, if you're not satisfied, you've got X number of weeks to take it to stage 2. And something we didn't say about complaints yet, which might be useful, is as a general rule, you need to raise the complaint within 12 months of you becoming aware of the issue. And it gets a little bit tighter with the LGO. It's a bit weird, but the LGO generally won't look at complaints that about something which is over 12 months old unless you've only just become aware of it. So again, almost like you need to get your complaints process started with the council maybe after 9 or 10 months at the latest, so they can go through their complaints process, and then you get to the LGO within 12 months. So yeah, anyone want to add anything to that, Shannon?
Yeah, I think so. You can also request to just sort of have dealings in writing. So because I think that last thing basically meant that they'd called on a private number, so there was no sort of proof that it was the housing officer that had even rang, and no way to sort of record what was said. So in your contacts and in your complaints, just request that to have everything down in email or letters, and then that way, I mean, for some areas and for some housing officers, it might not reduce the bullying. Be completely honest there, but for some, it might just put them off enough to, at least on paper, be treating you a bit fairer, a bit nicer, because there is that, like Will mentioned earlier, you can request your own data. So if they're acutely aware that everything's being put in writing, they're not going to be as horrible you'd think.
A lot of housing officers as well aren't used to having their records scrutinised by people. So I can't remember what case it was now. There's a case where essentially someone, housing officer basically just kind of just insulted, wrote some rather derogatory statements about a client to their colleague in writing, and then it was disclosed in the subject access request. So they, it led to conversation in itself. So yes, it's just you can't stress it enough how important that is to do that. Just a follow-up comment, I think, about the homeless application being triggered. So 100% it's when they have reason to believe you might be homeless. It's not when they interview you or kind of finally read the email or something. So I'm just trying to think which bit of the code of guidance makes it clear. It's one of those things in the code of guidance which is it should be so obvious that they kind of doesn't even say it. It's a bit like where the code of guidance used to say inquiries should be done in a caring and sympathetic manner, and now it doesn't anymore because that's everyone should know that. So I'm trying to think, but yeah, the code of guidance probably 18.5. There's also stuff in the code of guidance about just how councils have to have 24 hours kind of service. So again, that just makes the point it's an immediate thing. Will, I don't know if you know of any kind of things which just kind of hammer at this point that it's when the person approaches the council rather than when they actually.
The only thing I'm thinking of is, what are we talking about being triggered? The actual, there's a duty to assess under section 184, which arguably is triggered straight away. And then we were talking earlier about the relief duty, which is only triggered when they decide that they've accepted relief duty. But the one, if you've got priority need, then it's section 188 induces that says they're under a mandatory duty to provide suitable accommodation when they have reason to believe that you're eligible, homeless, and in priority need. Yeah. So as soon as they've been told, help, can you help me, then it's triggered that way. But it's not so clear. I mean, they're under a duty to investigate straight away, but whether or not they do it, it's difficult to measure when they become in breach of it. If they're saying, oh, we're doing it, we're just not doing it very fast. Whereas they can't say that with temporary accommodation.
Yeah, I think but there'll certainly be times where as a professional I'd write in and say, have you accepted the homeless application yet? Or have right at the times I'd write, has section 184 been triggered yet? And they would, they would either kind of argue it a bit, but I can't think of any specific case I took that all the way to the LGO to kind of make it. But yeah, I mean, so they can't say come in. Yeah, we've got an interview for you in 2 weeks. We'll come in and we'll kind of accept the application's been triggered. Then it's already been triggered. But so I guess it comes back to that priority need, kind of the importance of why you need to explain to them why you might be in priority need. So yeah,
I've seen cases where they do that, where they say we've got an appointment for you in 3 weeks or something, and that'll be for people who are in priority need. And they just try it on. I mean, it hasn't been for a while. I think during COVID, people thought, oh, people sort of got used to long waiting lists. Can I just say one other thing about that Friday afternoon phone call query? That, I mean, they shouldn't, I mean, they do, but they shouldn't really be ringing you and bullying you into making important decisions. So one thing I would suggest is if anyone ever gets a phone call like that, if you could politely say, look, I'm really having trouble understanding what you're saying over the telephone. You've got my email address. Could you just set out what my options are in an email, and then I can consider it? And that way you may be able, because they can't really say you've refused it. They could just say, yeah, difficulty understanding it. Although they may still have a go at saying you refused it. And the other thing I'd warn about is with records, there's a danger that they simply aren't making records. Because I used to have this thing a lot where people would go into the council, and this is going back a few years, and it was Wandsworth Council were particularly bad at it. But you'd go in there and make a homeless application, and then they'd give you some nonsense, and then when I wrote in and challenged them, they say either to say we've got no record of them coming in. And I said, well, of course you haven't, because you gatekeep them. So you're not going to keep a record. So today we gatekept 3 people. So I used to give people a letter saying, another trick they would do is say, oh, he came in, but he only came into us directions to the post office or something. He didn't say I'm making a homeless application. So I used to give them a letter to take in saying, I am making a homeless application. And I'd say to them, take another piece of paper and write down the name of the person you give this letter to. And then I got him, but it was like trying to catch a sort of wriggly eel.
I mean, if there's any proof at all that you've been in, though, the LGO is pretty good on.
Yeah,
they'll basically make the point that that the record keeping was subpar. So I had a complaint not too long ago where the council said that they'd rung her and she could prove from her phone records that they hadn't. And so that was kind of the LJ kind of didn't think much of the council for that. So that again it kind of comes back to the email just is the proof that you've approached them, so they can't wriggle out of things so easily. Yeah, so So and on this point, so I can't find it. I can't remember the wording of it, but in the Homelessness Code of Guidance, it does recognise that kind of, council shouldn't put people in a position where they've got to make really big decisions on it, on a kind of a drop of a hat. I can't remember how it's worded, so I can't. I've just been searching for it. I can't find it, but it's in there. Can't remember which chapter it's in, but there's kind of specifically says, yeah, people should be given time to actually make those decisions.
Could I just
So
ask a question as well? Sorry to there's somebody has put a point saying there's no official complaints procedure at the council. Could you just add a comment saying which council it is? I'd like to investigate that. Hopefully I can do a bit of Googling. That's the end of my question, yeah.
Yeah, cool. Yeah. So yeah, once we get the name of the council, we'll have a little look. So next one. So someone's received a letter saying council is owes them the main duty, and put in band 2. What's the chance of actually getting own tenancy? So pretty high. If you're second highest band, you've got a pretty good prospect of getting housed. It just depends how close to London you are. So we've said this many times before, but you can basically request a copy of the average waiting times for people in your band who need a 1-bed flat or whatever it is you need. And it's obviously not, it's an average. It's not going to be a gospel, but that will give you an idea. And a lot of areas, a lot of areas we see, you're looking at months rather than years, but generally not weeks. If you're over 55, it might be even shorter than that. But if they're accepting the main housing duty for you, then things are looking pretty good. Having said that, it is still technically possible that they could discharge their main duty into the private sector, even though you're on the bidding. So, yeah, you just need to be as active as you can in terms of bidding for properties, and just kind of work out which one you're coming highest on the list. Another one just talking about making homeless application, caseworkers making loads of mistakes. I mean, something we haven't said yet is that the caseworkers haven't probably read the code of guidance a lot of the time, so you might know more than they do. If they're making loads of mistakes, if they're making mistakes which are important and actually things hinge on them, then complain. If they're kind of less important, then just raise them with them. So yeah, and again, don't be put off if a housing officer says something stupid. Like I remember that one I talked about last week, where the housing officer said that as a professional, I couldn't trigger a homeless application on someone else's behalf, and I could, because I had their consent and I showed that, and the LGO upheld that and stuff. So don't, that was a senior manager who was saying that as well. So don't be put off by housing officers saying stupid things and just being kind of very obstinate and not listening. Just keep calm, quote the code of guidance, do it in an email. No point talking to them on the phone about that stuff. So we've got the name of the council that's coming. I've missed it. Oh yeah, so Torridge District, Devon. So yeah, we'll have a little dig
I have
around.
actually found it. I can paste it in the chat.
Yeah.
I've just popped it on the Zoom chat as well.
Right.
I don't know if you wanted to screen share, anyone.
Can we put the link straight to? Oh, it's a massive link. Okay.
I put it on there. Sorry, it's if you click on it, it should. There's basically a page that says complaints about services, and there's an email to customer services.
Yeah. So let's have a look through this one just to give an example. So you've got all this kind of stuff which they'll all say, we take it very seriously and all that sort of stuff. So stage 1, and it's kind of telling you different bits. So if your complaint is about waste or whatever, you go to this one, but then you kind of got the online. So online, we've talked about these online forms before. I would always say do an email, send an email to the complaints team. So there's complaints@torridge.gov. Send the email to them. The online complaints form, you don't actually know, you don't have any proof that you sent it all the time, and so it's just difficult. You've also got a pamphlet as well, which I imagine goes into a bit more detail. So you've got stage 2. So this is just a 2-stage thing. And where does it say timescales? Can't see anything about timescales there. Oh yeah, so yeah, to investigate your complaint, reply to you within 28 days. And then you've got stage 2, which it doesn't actually say here what that timescale is, but it would probably be something similar, maybe a bit longer. So this is fairly typical, as I say. It's a bit I mean, they might have to say this, but it's a bit pointless saying that you can go to the LGO straight away, because you need to go through the complaints process of the council before you get to the LGO. Otherwise, the LGO will just send you back to stage one. But yeah, so that's just a fairly typical complaints procedure. So yeah, cool. Unfortunately, it looks like the link is too long to put it into the live stream chat, which we'll put it into the description of the video if you remember. Okay, so where are we up to? Done that one. So someone's saying, isn't it better just to get a homeless housing lawyer who should understand the best procedure? If you can get a lawyer, then yeah, awesome. I mean, Will's got the link that we put on there actually on the description. Will's got a website which kind of gives loads of different solicitors that get legal aid for housing situations. However, we had someone on the live stream a couple of weeks back saying they tried every single one of those solicitors and they were all at capacity. So if you can get housing lawyer, brilliant. It's just, you know, that's kind of why I guess we're trying to do what we're trying to do here, is just trying to share this information, because you're going to struggle to get one. So I'm trying to just follow the live stream. So just someone saying that rather than going through complaints process, why not write to the local council chief exec, even if it's early stage? So yeah, I mean, all of these things are good. I mean, I would say send a formal complaint, but copy in the councillors, and potentially go and see councillors. You know, they'll have like regular surgeries. Yeah, that's kind of something I think, and MPs as well. I've heard it said several times that particularly if you're involving politicians who are on different parties, they try and outcompete themselves to get the situation fixed. So if you've got like a Labour councillor and a Conservative MP or something, copy them both into the complaint, and they'll both try and outdo each other in terms of being super nice and getting it sorted and get the credit for it. So I don't know how much truth there is in that, but I've heard it more than once. I'm trying to track this other question here. So someone's right. Oh wow. Okay. So yeah. Sorry. Yeah. There's a three-part. So someone's made a homeless application. Back and forth to caseworker. Already made loads of it. Sending me forms already filled in with other people's data. So there's a potentially serious data breach there. So if it was me working in this situation, I would immediately complain to the data protection officer of the council, which if you just Google your council's name and DPO, you'll get their contact details. You'll probably get their name as well, because particularly if that information, and it probably will include special category data, sensitive data, then they're already really stuffed up. I remember with Bedford, they sent me exactly like this, a template letter, and on the bottom it had the names and addresses of family members who were all fleeing domestic abuse, and they just sent it to me by mistake. One of many I've seen with various organisations, including councils. So you can complain about it. You know, in one sense, you probably want to get your situation sorted out rather than worry about the systemic issues. But certainly, it would be a complaint which we taken fairly seriously, and it would probably also actually be a good way of getting a competent housing officer on your case, because if that complaint goes to the DPO, they'll have a bit of a panic. They won't actually notify the ICO or anything, but they'll probably go back to the team leader of the housing team and say, you need to have, that stuff can't happen again. You need to get someone who's like, your most experienced staff member on the case. And then then the housing officer no longer works there. Back to square one. Assign another caseworker, calling since yesterday. And they've submitted all the health records, but caseworker says health not as priority. So again, get that decision in writing. So it's probably going to have to be a Section 184 notification, although it's really weird. If a council says there's no reason to think you might be in priority need, technically you can't ask for a review of that decision. You need to get a solicitor on the case. But if they basically said, okay, we've made inquiries into your medical issues, if they ask you for your medical letters, for example, that's an inquiry. And so they would need to issue a Section 184 decision which explains why you're not in priority need, which would explain how to ask for a review of it. And the review officer is likely to be a bit more useful than the first officer. But again, if you can get a solicitor in a case, then that would be really helpful. It's quite a complicated, to argue priority need through medical issues, it's not straightforward. It takes a bit of kind of headspace. But there's a couple of videos on this channel. One is called A Judge Explains Priority Need, where Sarah Steinard goes into quite a lot of detail about it. So it should give you a bit of help with understanding it. MP was useless. Yeah, it is hit and miss. Yeah, but still do it. Still, still do it. Even if you think it's not gonna do you any harm, and you've kind of raised it. And yeah, as I say, if you've been to the MP, they were useless. Go to a councillor. Generally speaking, there'll be at least two councillors who are relevant to your situation. So there might be two ward councillors plus the councillor who oversees housing. So you might even have three names that you can send it to. Yeah, I think is entirely possible that Tories government, that Tories council page was kind of offline or something for a bit, but it's back on now anyway. Okay, how we doing? So let's get through the last couple of questions from the week. So when you mean priority need, how long does it take for them to house you even with priority need? So again, we can't, priority need isn't even the full kind of question about whether the council owes you the main housing duty. So it's one of the 5 tests they need to look at. If you're in priority need, it's a good thing. But they'll also be looking at intentional homelessness. They might try and say you're intentionally homeless, and it's possible they might be making referrals under local connection criteria. So again, we just can't answer it. It just depends where you are. It's a good thing if you're in priority need. That's a good thing. It means the council's incentivized to actually help you out and actually help you into housing. But it could be years. If you're in London right now, it could be years basically. So yeah, again, goes back to that FOI and use the FOI process to ask for average waiting times. So I think that is, and just to labour this point. So this is one of the reasons why I don't want people to put personal data in any of the channel. Someone's basically put some medical issues in, said, am I in priority needs? The only thing I can do to that is go back to them and say, well, I need more information. And I don't want them to spew their whole medical record on YouTube. It's just not what it's for. If you ask the question as if it's about someone else, though, I could give you a sensible answer. So that's one of the reasons why I say don't put personal data on it. Just ask questions as if they're about someone else. It just means we can get around that kind of issue. You don't have to spew your guts to get a sensible answer. Okay, so that's the end of the questions that came in through the week. I think we've got all the ones which are on. I think we've covered all the ones that have come in on the live stream. So thanks for putting questions in, guys. There's some real good ones again. Yeah, I don't think we've missed anything. So we'll be on again tomorrow night. So ending homelessness through local democracy. I said this before. It's really unfair for me to ask people who are currently homeless or currently very stressed out about housing to actually do anything political. The problem is that I don't think there's anyone else really out there making any fuss about it. There's a lot of people who are paid to, charity workers and stuff who aren't doing anything useful. But at the very least, once you get yourself sorted out, please do kind of raise things with your local politicians, because, as I say, it feels to me like things are really kind of crumbling around different councils. And I would expect what that's going to mean for vulnerable people is they just don't get an answer. Yeah, they ring up the phone, they email, they do all the right things, and then they can get a response. So yeah, I think ultimately all we can do is just raise it with the powers that be, and try and get local government to be honest about the problem and go back to central government and cause them to actually change tact, because clearly the central government is capable of doing some very useful things like COVID and all that sort of stuff. They did a lot of good stuff very quickly. They need to kind of treat the housing situation as a crisis and actually build more houses. That's the only thing that actually works. So yeah, any final thoughts from you guys? Shannon?
Can I say one thing? Can I plug I've actually written a blog post this week.
Yeah, go for it.
I just put it in the chat there and on our chat. If you can open it, it's on the subject of challenging offers of unfurnished accommodation. So if they give you a place that's empty and it's and they say, well, we only have to give you accommodation, that's what you can do. I mean, a lot of councils are committed to giving furnished accommodation, but the reason I wrote the article was because somebody from a charity sent me a message saying, what do we do? We're getting quite a lot of people getting with people with children getting offered just empty places. And in a nutshell, the answer is, as the law stands, there isn't really any authority to say it has to be furnished. And in fact, there's a court case which is rather unhelpful that indicates that it doesn't. But that case was decided on its own facts, which involved a single man who did have some furniture, and the judge basically said you should be grateful for what you've got. But I've said if people with children or something get given something that's empty, then there is scope for challenge. And I put a link to what you can do. I mean, it's a more a lawyer thing, but you can. Oh, in fact, sorry, I posted the wrong link onto the chat.
Yeah,
Hang on. Yeah, if you look at that link, I don't know if you can share it.
Shannon, you able to put? Yeah, you call nice one. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's cool. I
Um,
mean, so interesting. Something came up back in Bedford because Bedford used to give unfurnished temporary accommodation, and they kind of kept making the point we don't have a legal duty to do anything more. And so I was working with someone who was heavily pregnant, and when I first met her in the TA, she was sleeping on the kitchen worktop. With all she had was literally a bag of stuff, a pram, and she was sleeping on the kitchen worktop. And I kind of complained about. I raised it with counsellors or something, and counsellors, as I say, they tend to be sane people who care about their public image. So they kind of had to do something, and ever since then, Bedford Borough Council has provided beds, and basic stuff
yeah.
at least. So yeah, it's yeah, common problem.
What I've done at the end of the post, if anyone's interested, is I've put the links to, I've created a couple of Google Docs, which would be the text. If you're going to write what's called a pre-action protocol letter to the council threatening judicial review proceedings, you'd need to have a section setting out the legal issues, and these sets out a sort of legal argument as to why they should give accommodation to two groups of people. One would be people with children, and the other would be people with medical conditions which may qualify them for Care Act assistance and or amount to a disability. So that, I mean, I appreciate the judicial review pre-action letter is not much use if you're not in a position to sort of do something with it, but it might be something that caseworkers and people can work with. And I'm going to try and do a video. I mean, I've kept quiet about it until now, but I was going to try and do a video like one of yours, Mike, about this, and I'm still planning to. But that'll probably come a bit later on. But I thought I'd mention it.
Yeah, that's really cool. I mean, yeah, so I've just put it up. I think it's now up there as a link, so it is coming up as
Yes,
a link.
thanks.
So yeah, so yeah, cool. I think anything like that is good, and it just kind of just it's another thing which yeah, which kind of needs to improve. So it's good to yeah, good to push for it. When you've done a video, we'll again plug it here. It's cool, be useful.
Yeah,
So yeah, cool. All right, guys. Yeah, again, hopefully see a lot of you guys tomorrow night for the event. Should be good, should be useful. And I think I'll be learning stuff there as well, I think, because there's some intricacies about it all. Other than that, we should be back a week tomorrow for the next live stream. Will's nodding, Shannon's shaking. So oh yeah. So be me and Will next week on the what's that gonna be, the 14th or something. So keep the questions coming in live on the YouTube comments. Do feel free to share the event tomorrow. It's just on YouTube. You don't have to sign up to or anything, but if you want to kind of tell people about it, then feel free to. And as always, if you want to subscribe to the channel and give it a like or whatever, it just helps it get out there a bit more. So yeah, cool. Take it easy, guys. We hope this has been useful.